I'm Greg Moffett. I'm a criminal profiler, an author, college professor, and a psychologist. But when it's hunting season, I'm in the woods as much as I can be. Welcome to Southern Hunter. Hi, I'm Greg Moffett, and welcome back to Southern Hunter. When we left off last time, we'd signed the contract. Now we're waiting for the inspections, appraisals, and the end of our 45-day waiting period. That's coming soon, but for now, if you're a Georgia hunter, you know this time of year. Anticipation. Bow season is close, so it's time to start preparing for the season. I think about hunting all year round. I'm either hunting, closing up from hunting, or preparing to hunt. And except for the hot summer months, there is something in season almost all year round. By midsummer, it's time to get ready for September. And this year, bow season opens earlier than ever, September 8th. I want my cameras and feeders going at least 4 to 6 weeks before that, so that means I need everything set up by the end of July. That gives me about 2 weeks from today. There are several things we need to do in order to be ready for the season. First, and by far most important, we need to check the safety of all of our stands. We need to check tree straps, bindings, pull-up ropes, welds, nuts, and bolts. We also need to check all of our stands, especially box stands for wasps. Then, we need to check our equipment. I always clean my guns at the end of the season, so they should be clean and oiled, but I need to check them again just to make sure. We also need to zero in sights. Because I shoot my bow all year round, I know the pins are right, but I put it in the routine anyway. We certainly don't want to miss a deer, or even worse, we don't want a bad shot that wounds a deer that runs off to die. That's every hunter's fear. A quick and clean kill is an ethical hunt. We'll talk about arrows and broadheads, as well as for gun hunters, we need to make sure our ammo is ready to go. We'll also want to check our feeders and make sure there's no old corn in them, and we'll want to check our cameras. So all of that's in store in today's episode. But before we take off, you may have noticed the flag behind me and maybe on my coffee cup in other episodes. It kind of looks like the Texas flag, but it isn't. This is the Chilean flag. For many years I've spent at least part of my summers in Chile. I've traveled the world with my work, and after my first trip to Chile many years ago, I was hooked on that lovely country, lovely culture, and beautiful people. It is now my second home. So, for my Chilean followers, bienvenidos mis amigos a Southern Hunter. Let's get started. One of the first climbers I want to check is this one right here. This is one of the first climbers I ever bought. It weighs a ton. I bought it at Walmart. It was a cheap climber, but this thing has been great. It's super heavy. It's not really convenient to carry very far, but I've carried it for miles. One of the things I like about it and why I still use it is because it's so heavy. Once I'm up in the tree, it is super stable. I like the lightweight Summit stands, the new ones, but this one, I can sit in the stand all day long, and I have sat from before sunup to the end of shooting light all day in the stand and not gotten tired. But we want to check it. It can be a little noisy because of these pins right here. We want to make sure that we check these cables. We want to check all these pins. We want to check all of our connections right here to make sure that none of this has worn. And we want to make sure we check all of our welds, any place where there's a welded spot, to make sure that there's no cracks or any kind of thing that would compromise the integrity of this stand. As you remember, I told you in the last episode, 4,000 hunters a year are injured in tree falls, and I don't want to be one of those hunters. So even though I didn't use this stand at all last year, almost all my stands are fixed stands, they're ladders or box stands, I'm still going to check this because every once in a while I'll see a good spot, I'll grab my climber, and I might want to climb. So I want everything to be ready to go the first of the year. So let's take a look at these cables. These pins come out, and this cable will remove. Now I don't remove it every time I get on the tree, but you notice we've got a break right here. This is not uncommon in this style. There's 3 pieces actually. There's a wire, a cable, and then this housing. So even though there's a crack here, I'm not too worried about it, but I'm going to check to make sure it's not rusting. or that there's anything that compromises. I've got spares of these, so if for any reason I'm concerned, I just get rid of these and put in a new set. There's a set of these cables on the lower side as well. So we're going to do the same thing. Pull that out. No cracking, no rust. And let's check this other side. And I think we'll find the same thing. Yep. Looks pretty good. So I don't see any problems on any of these welds, and I think I'm in good shape on this stand. Just a tad of rust right here. We'll be ready to go. What you see here is an old rifle stand. I rarely use this stand anymore, but again, for demonstration, it works pretty well. I don't like that rifle shooting rail that's on the front. If I'm shooting with my bow, it's in the way, and it's not really sturdy enough for a good rifle set, so I'd rather just have that gone. It's one of the reasons I don't use that stand. But in all these stands, we're going to have to check all of these straps right here, because that strap right there is the thing that keeps you on the tree. You can see both of those. So we'll need to put on our safety harness and check both of those straps. We'll also want to check that cable and that nut right there, because that nut can get rusty, and it's this bar that stabilizes your ladder. And one last thing I'm going to do on all my stands, you see all those leaves and pine straw up on the bottom of the stand right there? I want to get those out of there, because when I climb up in the mornings, I want it to be super quiet. I don't want any crunching of leaves or anything like that. We need to take a few minutes to talk about feeders today. There are a bunch of different ways that you can feed. You can feed through food plots, stuff that grows from the ground. You can use natural vegetation, especially up in the north where they harvest a cornfield. Deer come in there and love that. Or we can have artificial feeders. I have pipe feeders, which are gravity fed. I have trough feeders, which are just what they sound like, a big trough like you use in a barnyard with a little roof over it to keep the water out. We have electronic feeders that will run at various intervals depending on what you set them for. So there are different kinds of feeders that we'll look at today and look at some of the pros and cons of each one. I really like this multi-feeder. There's a lot of different kinds of electronic feeders like this, and they all operate on the same principle. There's a hopper where you put your corn, and there's some sort of a power cell, and 6-volt battery or whatever, that runs on a computer on the hours and the lengths of time that you tell it. There's a little metal plate here that spins, and the corn opens up, flows through here, and is strewn on the ground. Now, I've taken the legs off so this is shorter, so that you can see it a little better, but you can set it up very high to keep critters off of it. The thing I like about these is you can put about 150 pounds of corn in. I don't want to feed all the deer in the woods on a steady diet. I just want to put enough corn out that they keep coming around. So I'll set it a couple of times midday and a couple of times late at night, low traffic time for deer, so the noise of this spinning doesn't scare them. And I'll put just enough corn on the ground to keep them coming back. So I'll run it for about 5 to 8 seconds each time. So I can put corn in here and leave it for a month, and I won't have to come back and touch it. You can also mount cameras on this if you want to. I usually don't, but it's another option that's available. So that's one of the advantages. Disadvantage is it's noisy. They're more expensive, obviously, than a pipe feeder, but they're very durable and dependable as long as the squirrels don't get into them. I'll show you what I mean. So let me show you the damage that a squirrel can do. I had this multi-feeder for just 1 year. It was set up in a wooded area, and even though there wasn't a branch or anything hanging directly over it, somehow the squirrels kept getting on top of it, and they totally chewed it apart. You can see this hole right here is big enough 2 squirrels could go through there at once. They've just ruined it. You can see they have chewed all around it. I tried moving the lid so that it was like this, but they just chewed new holes. So they destroyed this feeder. So let me show you what I did to try to combat that problem that seemed to work pretty well. So you can see the old feeder right there on the ground and how it's just destroyed. Water will get in, the squirrels can get in and eat your corn. I'm really more worried about the water because it ruins the corn. If I put 150 pounds of corn in there and it gets wet, it's all gone. So what I've done is I've taken the same multi-feeder and I've built this little hardware cloth lid to go over the top that keeps the squirrels out of the top. Now it doesn't keep raccoons from hanging on the bottom and so forth, but it's not really that big a deal. So I just tie it down. When I'm ready to fill it, I can just take that off. and it works just fine. So this is an example of a pipe feeder. I have a bunch of these. They're very inexpensive. I buy a 10-foot piece of pipe, cut it in half, paint it camo. The most expensive things are these PVC caps that keep the squirrels out. So just like the squirrels chew through that plastic on my Moultrie feeder, they try to chew through this, but they can't do it. This keeps the squirrels out, and it also keeps the water out. So I can put about 50 pounds of corn in here, put that cap on, and it'll last for about a week during the busiest part of the season. The corn that gets on the ground, if it gets wet, it's no good. But there's still corn in here, and the deer and the squirrels will just knock that bad corn away. So this works pretty good for a real budget idea. I don't use this particular feeder. I've just set it up here for demonstration, but you're going to see a bunch of these on my lease because they're very quiet, they don't run on batteries, and they're just very simple to use. So about once a week I go through and check all my feeders, and they work great. You can see that this feeder is just bungee corded to the tree. It's not going anywhere, especially if it's full of corn. And you see down at the bottom, I just simply cut a little notch out so that the corn gravity feeds into the ground. Now it's a pretty good idea to put a piece of maybe concrete paver or something like that so that the corn's not laying directly on the ground. But I've used them both with and without. The deer keep coming. This is another kind of feeder called a bump feeder or a nudge feeder. Super low tack. It was the first feeder I ever bought was one like this, and I used it quite a bit. It just hangs on a chain or something between two trees, holds about 10-15 pounds of corn, and as deer come underneath it, they bump this, and corn will come out through that hole. It's super efficient because only corn will come out when this is bumped and only a little at a time. So once deer learn it, pretty much all your corn is going to be going to the deer, not to squirrels or other stuff. So it's very hard for critters to get in to use this. As it's hanging up, squirrels, raccoons get on top of it. They can shake a little bit out, but it's a ton of work for them. I used to use these a lot. I haven't used one in a while. They're way cheaper, even cheaper than those pipe feeders that I make. If you consider the caps, the paint to camo them, for 20 bucks you can get one of these. And as long as the deer can find it, they work pretty well. You can get these at Walmart, about any place that sells hunting gear. Another kind of feeder that is out there on the market is one I wouldn't waste any money on. Moultrie makes some great feeders. I've got several of them, but one of the feeders they make is a feeder that hangs on the tree. I bought one at Dick's Sporting Goods a couple years ago, and it didn't last a month. It looked good. It held about 40 pounds of corn, hung on the side of the tree, and here's a picture of it. Problem with it was too thin plastic, and within days squirrels had just chewed it to pieces and it ended up in the trash. So at least for deer hunting I wouldn't waste any money on that. I'm going to need to head down to the lease, put out some corn, and to do some work down there. But before we do that, I need to check my cameras and make sure my cameras are ready to go, because I want to put my cameras up today when I put this corn out. So let's go inside and get started on that. I have several things out on the table right now. I've got my voltmeter, I've got some broadheads, and I've got my cameras, and we're going to talk about each of those here as we get going. But I want to talk to you about broadheads for just a minute. There are all kinds of different broadheads that you can use. I've always bought the cheapest ones I can buy. I don't like mechanical stuff. People that use them like them, but I've never used them. I use about a 100 grain broadhead. I've never had any trouble with any of them. I bought these Strikers last year, and I typically will shoot a broadhead once, maybe twice. If I hit a tree or the dirt after a shot, I don't reuse the broadhead. I don't sharpen them. I want to make sure that I get a good, quick, clean shot and kill, and any potential damage to that broadhead, I don't want to risk it. So I'll use broadheads just once or twice, and then they go in the trash. There's a lot to think about when we think about cameras. I use these Wild Game cameras. Almost all my cameras are Wild Game. They work just fine. The batteries and all the controls are in the bottom, so it protects them from the weather. I didn't use cameras until just a few years ago, and now I can't imagine going without cameras. So let's take a few minutes and talk about what cameras do, where to set them up, and how to get the most out of them. If you're new to hunting, you might see all the equipment that I've shown you and suppose that it will cost you a fortune to get to this point, but that's just not the case. I've made my own feeders and collected many of them through many years of hunting. It's kind of like the furniture in my house. If I tried to go out and buy it all at one time, it would be expensive and time-consuming, but the fact is my wife and I have collected the furniture in our house over 36 years of marriage. I didn't even use game cameras, as I said, until just a few years ago. I can't imagine going back without it because with the cameras you can scout 24 hours a day and they do a lot of work for you. Even though deer can appear at any time, day or night, whether you've seen them on your camera or not, they are habitual creatures. They walk the same trails, they frequent the same food sources, water, bedding areas. They keep going over and over unless something disturbs them. So I can get a pretty good idea with my camera where I'll have the best luck at a given time of day, whether it's morning or evening, just by checking my cameras. Now, I hunt directly over feeders most of the time, but I only hunt the perimeters of my food plots. Because I'm bow hunting, I know that those deer will come in right under my stand if I'm quiet and I'm not putting out a scent. So, there are basically two ways that I hunt. The one way is meat from my freezer. And when I'm hunting for freezer meat, just to fill it up so we've got meat for the year, I hunt differently than I do when I'm trophy hunting. In the early season, large bucks just aren't out as much. So I'm scouting does and filling the freezer early on in bow season. I'll shoot a doe with its young as long as they are large enough to care for themselves. I'm an ethical hunter. Deer are social, they stay together, so those younger deer will stay with their mothers a good long time, or way longer than they have to. Last year I shot a doe with two young deer, and I'd seen them on the game cam. I felt like they were big enough. I saw the same two offspring the rest of the season at the same feeder, and also in nearby areas, so they were fine. Large bucks are rarely out early in the season. I shot an 8-pointer on opening day last year, but it was a small 8-pointer. It was a good size to shoot, but it certainly wasn't a trophy. Most big bucks stay hidden until the heat of the rut. I shot 2 8-pointers last year, and I don't regret either shot, but on the very last 5 minutes of legal light, on the very last day of the season, I saw one of the monster bucks we'd been hunting on our lease, and I couldn't legally take a shot at it. I don't think I'll find myself in that place again. I'd rather end the season with a buck tag in my pocket than to miss an opportunity on a large buck like I did last year. So I hunt close to my feeders for freezer meat, but I just try to hunt trails to and from food, bedding, and so forth for larger bucks. Bucks will hang in bachelor groups early in the season. Bucks spread out when they're older and during the rut. And it's not unusual to see a small buck chasing a larger buck because they run on those same trails chasing those does. I like to have my camera set up relatively close to feeders, and I leave the settings on the stock settings. I don't need super high quality pictures. I just want to see what's coming and going and at what time. So I'm not spending $300 and $400 on a camera. Most cameras only last for a year or two, sometimes 3 if you get a good camera. Interestingly, my oldest camera is still operating. I've had it for 5 years now, and that's really unusual. But I'll spend $45 to $70 on a camera, especially if they come with batteries and with an SD card. I hardly ever shoot video unless I have something worth keeping for the Southern Hunter program. So with each camera, I'll wade through thousands of pictures each season. Many of them are does, small bucks, or small critters like fox, raccoons, squirrels, coyotes. But it gives me a good idea of what I can expect in my hunting area. So before I take these cameras out in the woods, I want to make sure that my batteries are in good condition. I don't really trust the battery meters on cameras, so I'm going to check them with my voltmeter so I can make sure they're in good shape. I put these batteries in all these cameras toward the end of the season, so they should be pretty good, but what I don't want to do is lose a whole week of pictures because I've got one bad battery. Out of 8, one bad one's all it takes to kill the camera. So let's check these. So I have my voltmeter set on direct current and in the range of 1.5 volts, which is what these batteries are. I've got them lined up so I can just go through one at a time and check their reading. 1.38, 1.44, 1.39, 1.44, 1.38, 1.44, 1.38, 1.24. So these batteries are all slightly under their charge. I could probably get away with using them for a while, but I'm also noticing on this one I've got some corrosion right there on the end of that battery. So I think I'm going to go ahead and change these out just to be safe. So I'm going to do the same thing for all my other cameras. So now that we have all of our cameras checked and ready to go, I've got the truck loaded up with some corn, and we need to head down to the lease where I can check all of my stands, fill up my feeders, and put out my cameras. So let's jump in the truck and take a ride down to the lease. That's all we have time for today. I hope you'll join us next time when we go down to the lease and we check out all the feeders and stands and put out all of our cameras. So I'm Greg Moffett, and thank you for joining us on Southern Hunter. We hope you'll check us out on the web at southernhunter.org, and I hope you don't forget my other wishes, to hunt with Ted Nugent and to play guitar with Eric Clapton. So if you see either of those guys, let them know for me. We'll see you next time. I love this spot. And what you see back here in the yellow, I'm pointing the wrong direction. Welcome back to Southern Hunter. I did it again. I looked out. And deciding what I want to do about a tractor are just some of the issues that are for... Now it's time for the Southern Hunter tip of the day. Stand safety. Check. Now it's time for the Southern Hunter tip of the day, and that's stand safety. Most hunters, half of those falls, hunters weren't wearing their safety arrest system. That's a stupid thing to do. It would be easy to think you don't need a harness when you're just going up for a quick climb. One study showed that 4,000 falls each year from the stand. Use both hands, pull your gear bag up when you're safely seated and secured in your stand. And always wait until you're up in the stand before you pull your gear up. Of course, you're not going to pull it up. It would be easy and in half of those cases, no hunter was... So let me show you the damage that a squirrel can do to a feeder. I had this feeder for just 1 year, and it was in a fairly wooded area. I had it set up on all of its legs, but the squirrels, there's a hiccup. I got it to the point where I couldn't use it anymore. Oh, there's a frog in there. Hello, Mr. Frog. But I made this hardwire cloth to cover the top to keep the squirrels out. And there's another frog right there. Today what we're going to do is walk every inch of it. So we had a chance to look at the property just from the... So I hope you'll come back next time. I'm Greg Moffett, and thanks for joining